The release of the latest selection pack has brought alongside it the revitalization of one of the best decks that Master Duel has ever seen. Branded DESPIA. Branded DESPIA used to be the sole tier 1 deck for quite some time after the release of Sword Soul, and was very dominant for quite a while. It was eventually overtaken by the likes of Sprite and then Tearlaments, of course, and has still been on the tier list to some degree since then. I think only falling off once or twice, but then quickly retaking its spot, so it's definitely always been a top contender. But the latest wave of support has absolutely changed the landscape of how powerful this deck is. This deck is this deck has led to one of the easiest ranked claims I've ever had in my life. On stream, for anyone who caught our stream, we accidentally went from Platinum 4 to Diamond using this deck. Since then, I went on a crazy win streak from Diamond 2 all the way up, Diamond 5 all the way up to Diamond 2, at one point winning 17 out of 20 games, going on a 10 win streak. This deck's incredible. It really, really is. And this is how I'm currently playing it. I don't know if this is the definitive way. There's a couple of other really cool cards that you would like to fit in, like Fusion Deployment and stuff. I don't know why I typed in Fusion as if there isn't a million cards. Fusion Deployment's a really cool option of things, so I'm not entirely sure if this is like the final way of playing it, but I have been seeing crazy amounts of success playing it just like this, and I have no doubt that I'm pretty much gonna carry this deck in the Master. It's not going to be any trouble at all. So anyone else who's looking to pick up Branded DESPIA, maybe they just want to play a different deck, this is definitely going to be one of the contenders for the top spot, challenging tier in its dominance of the meta. So we're going to go through a few replays, then we're going to be doing a deck profile at the end of the video. So if you're interested in that, stick around, like the video if you enjoy what you're watching, and subscribe if you want to see more. Let's get into it. We had so many amazing matches with this deck that it's hard to select just a few to put into a video, but we're going to start off with just some basic ones demonstrating how the deck actually works. Now, Aliber is essentially your one card key to victory here, to be perfectly honest, so we're going to activate our Branded Regain just for some more advantage later on. Aliber will grab you Branded Fusion. This is very similar to how Branded used to work, except the difference being you're going to be sending Lubellion instead of a Dark Monsters to summon out Albion the Branded Dragon. Albion the Branded Dragon will then fuse, ideally, your Albaz and any other Dark Monster you have. So something like your Aliber that you summoned, or potentially a monster in your hand, to summon out Lubellion the Searing Dragon. Lubellion the Searing Dragon, drop a card to fusion summon yet again by shuffling back. Now Branded Regained isn't the vital part of the combo, but it's a nice little continuous spell that whenever a card is banished, we basically get to shuffle it back and then draw one. It's a nice little bit of draw power. But it's definitely no more than that. We draw into Branded Beast, which is actually, this is an unfortunate draw because you normally activate this straight from your deck, so not the greatest draw in the world, but it's fine. We're going to summon out Mirror Jade, of course, Mirror Jade being able to quick play banish a card during either player's turn. Now we're going to tribute the Albion to summon Lubellion out from the graveyard. Now Lubellion can activate a branded continuous card directly from your deck. Normally it's Branded Beast, but since we already have Branded Beast, we're instead going to activate Branded Lost, which admittedly doesn't do much in this situation. So this is your standard sort of end board, and then Albion during the end phase will also set Retribution. So what you've got here is you've got a quick play banish without targeting, you have a targeted pop, you have a counter trap negate of a card that summons something, and then you also have your Bystial Baldrake. To banish cards from your opponent's graveyard, and then you have Branded Lost and Branded Regained, which will constantly be generating you card advantage. You have your Branded Opening to protect your fusion monsters from destruction. So you have quite a lot going on here, and it's quite a versatile board as well. There's not like one button your opponent can press to turn it off, and just like that, our opponent didn't really have a way to play through all of that. You're going to see that happening a lot. But no, that's the basic sort of idea, the basic sort of setup. But the thing I love about this deck is that there's so many different avenues that you can go down. The new Bystial cards bring alongside them so much versatility. You don't have to adhere to a fixed combo. That's just an idea of how you probably want to play in an ideal situation. Anyway, let's get into the next replay. Alrighty, now we have to show off the tier matchup at least once. We have Lubellion now in hand, so we can discard him to grab ourselves a Bystial card. Magnamut is definitely the best of them. We're going to activate Branded Fusion, sending... So whenever you have, again, I don't know if this is like an optimal line of play, but typically whenever I have Lubellion in my hand to begin with, I still go down the Albion route, but what I do is I will send Cartesia to the graveyard instead of Lubellion, of course. So that means Cartesia can basically add itself back to my hand during the end of my turn, meaning I've got follow-up for next turn, or at the very least discard fodder for some sort of utility. A lot of people would instead like to play Fusion Deployment to try and summon this out, but I just didn't find that to be nearly consistent enough for me to justify running additional cards. So I feel like this little play here is totally fine. We're going to use Albion's effect then. Albion, however, is they're going to try and negate that. Luckily, we do have Crossout Designator. We would still be able to play even without our Albion resolving. All it would basically stop us getting is the Mirror Jade, but we would still have our Lubellion play for Branded Beast and things, so it wouldn't be the end of the world. We would just rather have the Mirror Jade, and at the cost of a Crossout Designator, I'll take that hit. So we're going to drop our remaining Lubellion. We're going to trigger off the Mercurier that we banished as cost for our fusion. Mercurier's going to grab us Albion the Shrouded Dragon, and Lubellion's going to fusion summon into Mirror Jade the Iceblade Dragon. Now, Albion's pretty useful. I really like using this card. There's a bunch of different ways you can use it. Number one, the way I would normally use it, I would pitch Branded Opening to my graveyard. Simply because I want to have that layer of protection for my fusion monsters. But another really good use of this card is if you pitch a continuous card off of it, Branded Regained or Branded Lost, you can then use Branded Beast secondary effect to bring it back to the field. So there's a bunch of utility there. This was a replay where we were using Fusion Deployment, and this is what I mean. This is one of the replays where I was looking at it like, what am I doing with this card 90% of the time? So it's not really, in most situations, it's not necessarily worth it. You can see Branded Beast here. You can target a continuous spell or trap in your graveyard, place a face up on your field. So using your Albion, you can pitch a continuous card to then be reset by your Branded Beast, but I feel like the opening is also just as valuable, if not more valuable, because of that protection. You really want to keep your Mirror Jade around until your opponent gets rid of it. Cartesia comes back to hand. We of course have the Magnomet. Yeah, we're looking pretty. We're sitting pretty. Oh, I didn't realize they did this. When did they start doing? That's really cool. What? They're playing Siren and Scream. They've got cards, man. Okay. Going for Merly now. I didn't even realize they did that. Holy crap. Okay. Branded Beast. So we're going to use Branded Beast here. Forgive my surprise. I haven't recorded a video since the latest update. I've been just live streaming a lot. Magnamut's going to banish the Merly from the graveyard, stopping them from fusion summoning. We're going to pop the Scream. No milling for you. They do get to search for Sullick. Merly then doesn't get the fuse. Scream doesn't get the mill. We do get the search during the end of the turn, and our opponent has nothing. We're going to use Mirror Jade, banish the Siren. GG's. Easy dubs. I didn't realize they did the whole win rate thing. That's pretty cool. I don't know if it's obstructive, but it's pretty cool. Either way, that is the tier matchup. Is that the best demonstration of the tier matchup? Not necessarily, but at the same time, you have a massive advantage in this matchup. The fact that you have the ability to use your counter trap to negate summons, you have the non-targeting banishment. The non-targeting banishment in particular is amazing against tier limits. That's why we do tend to go the extra mile to try and go into Mirror Jade, because that little bit is very, very valuable. But yeah, let's get to the next one. Alrighty, getting in the replay number 3. Now you'll notice that this hand isn't quite as strong. I didn't want to show off all games where you had the same win con, because that's not how it happens. Sometimes you simply don't have access to Branded Fusion. Now luckily, Super Poly is amazing. And Super Poly, I keep raving about this to people. Super Poly is better now than it's ever been. I'm so eager to play this card a lot. They're going to go Fusion Deployment. It's the mirror match. It's the mirror match, and our opponent opened like a damn god. So they're popping off. They're gonna grab the Brand of Fusion. They're gonna activate Brand of Fusion. Luckily, we've got an Ash Blossom, so we are going to be able to stop that Ash Blossom here. That is going to be enough to stop their Brand of Fusion. They have no way of negating it, so that is perfect. Cartesia now is gonna activate Fusion Summoning. Now, admittedly, we did mess up a little bit. We probably should have hit the Cartesia with the Super Poly before they did this, but it's fine. We're just going to leave it and see what happens. They are going to trigger their Saronir. They're going to trigger their Dusk Dragon. Mill out a card, and Dusk Dragon will also send Lubellion to the graveyard, which is interesting. Typically, I would send a fusion monster, but same difference, I suppose. They're going to banish a card here for their Drissworm. We tried to return their monster back to their deck to draw a card off of Regain, but they're going to Ash Blossom our Upstart Goblin. That's totally fine by me. They're going to tribute a card for their Bystial Lubellion, and at this stage, before they can activate the effect of Lubellion, that is when we're going to flip up our Super Poly. We're going to fuse together his two monsters for Stapelia. Stapelia then having the ability to negate the Lubellion should we need to. We also get to search our deck for Cartesia thanks to Branded Lost. So we do get to search for a little bit of follow-up here. We tried negating the Lubellion, but unfortunately he has Branded in red on deck. Very, very lucky draw there from our opponent. But fair enough, you know, sometimes it happens. They're going to fusion summon into Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. That means our Stapelia negates going nowhere. Lubellion does get to play a Branded Beast from the deck, and they get to reset Branded Regained from their graveyard, like we talked about in the last replay. Cartesia coming back to their hand. So we have very, very similar setups here, but his is just a touch more aggressive. That Branded Beast, though, is not usable unless you have a Bystial monster on board. So we do need to be careful. Masquerade the Blazing Dragon is going to... Basically, so here I messed this up a little bit, admittedly. We shouldn't have negated this. I didn't realize that it was... I forgot that it was activated effects only, right? So that was a misplay from us. We shouldn't have negated that. It doesn't do anything. We're going to grab Magnamut here. We are going to activate Cartesia's effect, special summoning it to the field. That triggers off his monsters in the graveyard. Now, we knew, of course, that he was going to try and resummon a Bystial from the graveyard off of his Regain. That's why we wanted to use Magnamut last, so that we could banish the Bystial he attempts to revive. That means his Branded Beast is going to stay dead. That's the idea. He does bring out Proskenion, but we don't have any fusion monsters for him to steal just yet, so we needed to think carefully about how we wanted to play this one. Again, we're both popping off here. There's effects left, right, and center. Branded Regained. He's going to shuffle back a card. He's going to draw one. Ours fizzles. Then Magnamut at the end of the turn will get searching. Now we're going to summon out the Bystial Lubellion. Lubellion then is going to activate its effect, grabbing us Branded Beast. We're going to go into the battle phase, take out the Masquerade. I'm sick of that burn damage. Branded Beast, however, is a main phase only effect, so now we're going to use it to pop the Proskenion. During the end of the turn, we grab the Baldrake. So we're in a decent enough spot here. He does manage to summon out his Magnamut here during the end of our turn. The mirror match can be pretty back and forth, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's not a foregone conclusion just yet. Our opponent is summoning out a lot of Bystial monsters, though, putting out some huge monsters. Luckily, Dragon Stapelia is slightly bigger. He is going to try and pop the Cartesia for some reason instead of the Stapelia, but we're going to use our Cartesia now either way. Fusion summoning into the Dusk Dragon. Dusk Dragon, 2500 defense, plus it gets the Miller card on summon. He is, however, going to use the Drissworm's effect to get rid of it. I'm not sure if he has some sort of plan for Stapelia, because he's refusing to target this thing. Branded Lost going to grab us Mercurier. Dusk Dragon's going to send the Rindbrum to the graveyard. Now, we do have Fallen of Albaz in the grave, meaning we can use Rindbrum's effect. Branded Regained is going to summon back the Baldrake. Rindbrum now is going to summon out the Fallen of Albaz. Using his effect, we can discard the Mercurier to fusion summon on the field. We are also going to get to shuffle back our Rindbrum for later off of our Branded Regained. So you'll notice the constant resources and everything you can generate with this deck. It's very sort of loopy, which I love. It offers you a lot of freedom. Now we're going to fuse 3 together for Trifovertum. He's going to normal summon Alibur. We're going to negate that off Stapelia. That means he has no Bystials nor Dragons left for his Branded Beast. He will, at the end of this turn, though, I believe, be searching for one, unless that was last turn. He does sacrifice his Masquerade to take out our Baldrake, and then he scoops it up. He realizes that, you know what, that's pretty much GG's at that stage. There's nothing he can do to beat us. So yeah, pretty interesting mirror match. You can see how the deck has a ton of versatility, even if you don't open up the likes of Branded Fusion now. Whereas beforehand, if you're playing Branded and you don't open Branded Fusion, you just lose. You simply lose. So yeah, either way, that's pretty cool. Let's get into one more replay and then we'll do a deck profile. Alright, one last replay. Now, we were playing Fusion Deployment. This is one of our earlier replays. We get hit with an Ash on the Branded Fusion. That's when you know you're having a bad day. Either way, we don't. We have a few tools in our hand. We're gonna send Branded Opening to the graveyard here. Shuffle one back, draw. We draw into the Bystial Lubellion, which is a excellent top deck. We're gonna use its effect to grab the Magnamut. Fusion Deployment then is going to summon Cartesia from the deck. This is one of those situations where Cartesia can be seen, or Fusion Deployment can be seen as useful. It's just, it wasn't always worth playing the brick. So the Dust Dragon's a card where I haven't really figured out like what is the best mill off of the Dust Dragon. I typically just send something like Albion or Rindbrum or something like that, depending on the situation, but I don't really know fully what the best send is, if you will. We're going to banish Tragedy to summon out Magnamut. That triggers Magnamut, Branded Regained, and I believe Tragedy. No, we've already used Tragedy this turn to search for Alibra. That's right, I'm stupid. We get to grab Branded Lost. We'll activate it here, and at the end of the turn we get to search for another Bystial card, tributing off our Magnamut, summoning out Lubellion, setting Branded Beast to the field. Now, that was a pretty good turn considering our Branded Fusion was negated. We also get to set our Branded Unread from the deck. Branded Retribution does nothing here since we don't have any monsters that list Fallen of Albaz on the field, and we only have one in the graveyard, so Retribution would have been dead. Branded Unread, at the very least, will give us a potential Chimera play if he gets rid of our Alibur. So there's some potential there. We grab a couple of cards during the end of the turn, which is awesome. Main phase 1, our opponent's going to go for no Punk Xiaomin. We're playing against Punks. Now, if anyone knows my channel, they know that we play a lot of Punks on the channel, so we're going to pop that Xiaomin. They're going to go for that Grass Looks Greener. We try to ash it, but our opponent has Cult by the Grave, because of course they do. You can't negate that Grass Looks Greener. Simply impossible. So we're going to be milling a whole bunch of cards here. We've got 30 cards in deck. They've got 54, so that's 24 total cards being sent to the graveyard. Out of those 24 cards, we can see they're playing Bystials, they're playing Thunder Dragons, they're playing Tearlaments, they're playing Punks, they're playing Chaos, they're playing Synchrons. They've got everything. There's the Shinobi Necro. They've got everything they need, and this is going to be a tough situation here. We are going to sacrifice our the Dusk Dragon. We weren't playing for Skenion at this stage, so we have to go into Quiritus. There's no point summoning Masquerade off that effect because I'm pretty sure it doesn't count as a fusion summon. Yeah, so Masquerade doesn't get its effect anyways. We do draw an extra card here. We draw the Mercurier, which unfortunately is not useful because we don't have a Albaz fusion. So we're sort of at the mercy of our opponent here. They're going to bring back the Rhino Heart, triggering off Tearlaments, Kikalos, and Rhino Heart, so they get to mill 5, and then they get to mill a specific Tearlament monster. So they're going to send Siren. We're going to use our Bystials effect. We're going to banish that Siren. They're going to use Mudora to protect the Siren, I suppose. Fair enough, although it doesn't really accomplish. The only thing that accomplishes him now is because we didn't banish the card, we don't get to summon the Bystial, but the whole point of us using the Bystial is to deter him from fusion summoning. So we don't really mind that we don't get to summon the Bystial. He goes into Cross Sheep, and this guy is employing basically the same decks and strategies that I would be using on the channel, so I'm very familiar with this. I'm also very familiar with how brutally powerful it is. So I'm looking at this board thinking to myself, how the hell do I survive this turn? We're going to bring it out here. I'm going to speed it up because there's quite a lot going on. They're going to summon out Punk. Chaos Ruler then comes out. Chaos Ruler checks the top 5 of the deck to grab a Lighter Dark after reviving the Ogre Dance off of Deer Note. So this guy's deck is pretty complicated, but if you want to know how this deck works, we have a ton of videos on Punk Thunder Dragons, which is basically employing all the exact same strategies that he's employing right now, and I mean the exact same, except the Bystial cards are of course new. They're going to bring out the Baron de Fleur. I don't know why I paused that instead of fast forwarding it. Going to banish 2 from the grave, bringing out the Chaos Ruler once more, bringing out the Shinobi Necro so they can go into Cheng Ying as well. Cheng Ying, Colossus, Baron, it's just looking mighty fine for our opponent here. They're just going to start banishing our cards, and at this stage there's not really an awful lot we can do about this. They're going to go into the Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord for an extra negate, popping the face down Branded in red, and yeah, that is pretty much GG's. Crazy deck with a crazy ceiling. You resolve that Grass Looks Greener, it becomes very tough for you to win that game. But yeah, again, we put up a pretty decent fight considering our Branded in red was, our Branded Fusion was negated. I just wanted to show that off, and I don't like putting up videos where it's all wins. I feel like that's very narcissistic, if you will. Either way, let's get into the deck profile. Alrighty, so this deck is virtually identical to what you would have seen in a lot of the replays, especially the sort of middle ones. Now, on a couple of them, you would have seen a card called Fusion Deployment, which is a card I was playing. I was sort of playing back and forth on whether or not I wanted it. It's really good. I feel like it's definitely a valid choice. A lot of people do play it. I was playing it at 2. I was playing a 42 card deck. I didn't sub out anything for it. I just decided I wanted to play a 40 card deck and I cut it. Initially, I was playing 42 cards which again is totally fine. You want to play Fusion Deployment, 42, 43 cards, that's good. I would say 44 is probably the limit. I wouldn't want to push above 44 cards. But 42 you can get away with, but it wasn't useful enough all of the time for me to justify running over 40 cards for it, if that makes sense. So here's the deck we were playing. We're going to go through card for card and sort of explain what everything does and why it's here. Starting off with our Despian Tragedy. So Despian Tragedy, if it's sent to the graveyard or banished by a card effect, you can grab a Despia monster from your deck to your hand. Now, many of these decks will be playing a monster known as Ad Libitum of Despia. It's not a monster that I personally run because while it is powerful and useful, it's not useful enough all of the time for me to justify running it as a brick. I just didn't like it. But again, totally up to yourselves. Because this deck searches for branded and red a lot less often than the old branded Despia versions, Ad Libitum becomes less useful. I prefer searching for branded Retribution or something to that effect rather than branded and red. So Ad Libitum's not useless, I just tend to use the cards that make him useful less. And Tragedy basically, so because we're not playing Ad Libitum, Tragedy is here exclusively to search your deck for Aliber, and Aliber is significantly more useful in this version of Despia than he has been in previous ones because we're playing more versatile search targets for him. So being able to search your deck for Aliber is pretty damn good. He also has another effect where you can banish him from your graveyard to recycle a branded spell or trap card in your grave, setting it back onto your field. That is an effect that comes up quite a lot, so you will want to be playing at least one copy of Tragedy. I don't think more than one is necessary for this version, unless you want to throw in some Allure of Darkness, but the one Tragedy is definitely mandatory. We've got 3 Maxi and 3 Ash Blossom, pretty standard hand traps. We got double Fallen of Albaz. I'm always super tempted to cut this down to 1 copy of Albaz because I hate seeing it in my hand, but it's not useless in your hand either. It definitely can be useful while you've got it in your hand alongside something like a Cartesia or as discard fodder, or even just using its effect to normal summon and fusion someone on the field. That almost always eats a negate. If it didn't have a discard cost, I would love it, but it does have a discard cost, which does limit how much you want to use that ability. Another really useful thing is his combination with Alba Lunatus. Alba Lunatus can be contact fusion summoned, so just by sending monsters on the field to the graveyard, no activation, no nothing, using the Fallen of Albaz and any number of dragons from anywhere on the field. It doesn't even have to be your Fallen of Albaz. We saw it on stream where someone used our Fallen of Albaz for this. So if your opponent's playing dragons, like Branded for example, you can just wipe their board using this normal summon. Albaz, don't even need to use its effect, don't even need to do anything, you just normal summon it or even set it, and then Alba Lunatus, wipe out all the dragons. So running 2 isn't the worst thing in the world, but you can run 1 and get away with it. Aliber. Aliber is awesome. On summon, search a branded spell or trap card from deck to your hand. That's basically the height of its utility in 90% of cases. It does also have another effect where if a fusion monster on your field is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card, then you can resummon him to the field by targeting an opponent's monster and negating it. That came up like once, I think, or like literally once, and it was in a Dogmatica matchup, and it did, to be fair, win us the game. It did win us the game, so I can't be mad at it. So it is a neat effect that might come up. The only reason it's less useful in this version, rather than older versions of Branded, is that you're not really so reliant upon having fusion monsters on your board anymore. A lot of your end boards are typically taken up by Bystial cards. So you're not always going to have fusions on board to even use that effect. So you know, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but definitely being able to search for a branded spell or trap on summon makes him mandatory. You need to play as many copies of this guy as you can. Right now that's 2. 1 copy of Mercurier. Fusion material for Rindbrum. First of all, you need to have at least 1 Tri-Beast, and this is our Tri-Beast of choice. If you control a fusion monster that lists the Fallen of Albaz as a material, then you can discard this card and negate the activation of a monster effect. So that's really, really solid. If this card's ever banished, you can add from your deck to your hand a Fallen of Albaz or a monster that mentions it. So it's really sort of 2 effects built into 1. This card is amazing value for sure. A lot of people even play this at more than 1. I only have the 1 copy, and I don't think I don't find myself in situations where I wish I had one in my hand more often, because it's very, very searchable. So one more courier is just fine. Being able to search your deck for something like Albion or Cartesia or something like that is awesome, while also having the ability to act as a negate. It's just a really good card. Blazing Cartesia, the Virtuous. Now this is one of the new cards that is awesome. We only need to play it at one because it's very, you can get access to it very easily. A lot of people do play more than one. You can if you want. I think one is fine. It's a tuner, which doesn't matter in this deck because you're fusion locked 90% of the time. But if you wanted to throw in like a Baron de Fleur to work alongside one of your Bystials, by all means. So if the Fallen of Albaz is on your field or in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, which is really good, of course. And as a quick effect during the main phase, you can fusion summon for a level 8 or higher fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters in your field and hand. It can also add itself back from the graveyard to your hand during the end phase of a turn in which a fusion monster was sent to your graveyard. So Cartesia is definitely really good. The recurring aspect of the card is really nice. The quick play fusion summon is nice. Everything about it is just super useful. Yeah, so definitely playing Cartesia at least one is mandatory. The Bystial cards. We're playing one of each of the 4 Bystials. We're playing one Magnamot, Saronir, Drewsworm, and Baldrake. Now they all have the exact same summoning conditions. You can target a light or a dark monster in either's graveyard and banish it to special summon these cards, and if your opponent controls a monster, that becomes a quick effect. So they are massive sources of graveyard disruption, which is very important in this meta, of course, and has been since the release of tier limits. So Magnamot and things being able to banish your opponent's graveyard and banish your opponent's tier limit monsters or your branded monsters or whatever it is supremely useful. They all also have another individual effect. The best among them, of course, being Magnamot, which during the end phase of the turn in which he is summoned will search your deck for another Bystial card. So that's really, really good, of course, because you get to grab another card. Saronir, when sent to the graveyard, will mill a Bystial monster or a branded spell or trap card. It is just a solid effect, being able to either A, put something like Branded Opening into your graveyard, or a continuous card to be recycled off of Branded Beast, or potentially something like a Branded Fusion to be recycled off of DESPIA Tragedy. So there's a lot of versatility with that effect, for sure. A lot of people do play additional copies of Saronir for that exact reason. We've got Drewsworm. When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target a special summon monster your opponent controls, send it to the grave. No destruction, no banishment, no nothing. You send it to the grave, which is a pretty interesting form of disruption that you wouldn't otherwise have had. So Drewsworm, I would say, is probably the second best, behind Magnamot. And then Baldrake and Saronir, it's hard to choose between, but Baldrake basically says if your opponent special summons a Ritual, Fusion, Synchro Exceed, or Link monster, you can tribute one of our later dark monster to target one of them and banish it. So basically just banishing an extra deck monster on summon, which is very useful. Again, Baldrake, definitely pretty cool. All of these guys are amazing forms of graveyard disruption, and they all have pretty solid effects on board, and they're all 2500 beaters, level 6 dragons, which is pretty important for one of our upcoming cards. But before we talk about the Bystial Lubellion, let's talk about Albion the Shrouded Dragon. This card can basically... It's essentially Foolish Burial as a card, which is pretty awesome. So you can do it whether or not this card is in your hand or in your graveyard. You can still activate the effect. If it's in your hand, you can send a Fallen of Albaz related card or a branded spell or trap card from your deck to the graveyard or your hand to the graveyard. And by revealing this in your hand, you shuffle this card into the deck and then you draw one. You very rarely use its other effect, where if you send a card from your hand to the graveyard to activate that, you can special summon them. You don't really use that effect very often because you're not using him for his body on board. Typically what you do is you'll send something like a Branded Opening or a Branded Regained or whatever it is, something that's either useful in graveyard or due to be recycled from the graveyard, shuffle him into the deck, draw one. Easy mulligan. You can do it while he's in the graveyard as well, but you don't get the draw. You basically just send a card and shuffle him back in. Pretty useful. Again, that's why you only need one copy, because he just loops himself over and over. It's definitely a very, very solid card, and it's never really a brick, because like I said, it just shuffles itself back into the deck. So like, it can't be a brick. It physically cannot be a brick, because it just sends itself back and mulligans after milling a card. So why not play at least one of it? The Bystial Lubellion. Bystial Lubellion has two main effects, of course, and, well, three, kind of. Number 1, if it's in your hand, you can discard it to grab another Bystial card from your deck to your hand, making it a search. That's pretty awesome. That's why we're playing 3 of it. We don't mind seeing it in our hand. Then, if you control a level 6 or a higher Dark Dragon monster, you can tribute that monster to special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. So ideally, that's going to be something like your Albion, that's going to be something like your Bystial Dragons, whatever. So you can basically summon this guy super easy from the graveyard just by tributing a dragon. This last effect allows you to basically activate a continuous branded spell or trap directly from your deck. Now that's going to be primarily your branded beast, so it gets to activate it straight from the deck, which is incredible. Bystial Lubellion, I think this card's definitely a 3 of. I think this card's amazing. I love having it in my hand because I love getting access to more Bystial cards. You could play this at 1 and then play maybe another Saronir and another Baldrake instead. You could do that because, like I said, you're going to be sending this card. If you don't have it in the hand, you can just send it to the grave off of your branded fusion. So you can play it at 1 for sure. It might even be better. I don't know. I've just been playing it at 3 and I've been seeing a lot of success. So it is what it is. Getting into spells, we've got Brand of Fusion. Brand of Fusion, of course, being able to send monsters from your deck to the graveyard, up to 2 monsters only. You're not sending your whole deck for Albal and Addis. You get to send 2 monsters from your deck to the graveyard to fusion summon so long as your monster mentions the Fallen of Albaz as material. So basically, this is your 1-card starter, one of the best cards to ever exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! For sure. In a vacuum, of course. I'm not saying Branded is one of the best decks to ever exist, even though it probably is. But this is one of the single most powerful cards in the game. It allows you to instantly fusion summon out Albion, which is what you'll primarily be using it for, either using Lubellion or Cartesia and your Fallen of Albaz as material. And then Albion begins a whole chain where you will Albion use its effect to fusion summon into Lubellion and then fusion summon into Mirror Jade, while still having got a whole bunch of resources. And it's pretty nutty. And it all starts with Branded Fusion. You really want to resolve this card because it is absolutely nutty. We'll talk about what the fusion monsters do in a minute. We've got Branded Lost. Branded Lost has a couple of effects. First of all, the activation of your cards or effects that includes an effect that fusion summons a monster cannot be negated. Now bear in mind, the effect can be negated, but the activation of the card or effect cannot. So that is worth bearing in mind. That means your opponent can still Ash Blossom you on your Branded Fusion, but they can't like Solemn Judgment you. They can't drag out you, right? A lot of things that you'll notice is people will try to hit something like Branded Fusion with Retribution. Branded Retribution. They'll try to use Retribution to hit your fusion card, and it's not going to work because you've got Branded Lost. So there's definitely a bit of utility here. It's not a blanket. Your fusion summons cannot be negated, but it is definitely very useful. One of the more useful aspects of the card, however, is that your opponent cannot react to your fusion summons with card effects. So if you fusion summon a card, a chain link 1 of a chain, your opponent basically cannot respond to that summoning or the following chain until the resolution of that chain. So it is definitely really, really strong in that regard. And it also even has a little bit of a search. So if you do end up fusion summoning, you can search your deck for any monster that lists the Fallen of Albaz in its text. So, you know, it has some protections, it has some blanket protection, it has some search power. It's pretty solid. I would definitely play at least 1 of it. I wouldn't play more than 1 of it. I would play 1. 1 is fine. Because you can get access to it straight from the deck, either by milling it and recycling it off of Branded Beast, or by searching it off of Alibur, or by grabbing it off of Tragedy. There's a whole bunch of ways in which you can get it. So, well, I wouldn't play more than 1 of it. Branded Regained. One of the new continuous cards you want to be playing in the deck. This card is really good. It's very subtle in how much value it generates you, but it's definitely worth playing for sure. If a later dark monster is banished, you can target one of those monsters, shuffle it back into the deck, or sorry, place it back on the bottom of the deck, and then draw a card. That could be your card, that could be your opponent's card, whatever. And a lot of that's going to be coming from your Bystials banishing cards to summon themselves. So you can banish your own cards and then shuffle those same cards back in to generate more advantage. So Branded Regained is pretty good even just for that, but it has another effect where once per turn, if your opponent summons a monster, you get to target a Bystial in your grave and summon it. That really helps with keeping your Branded Beast alive, because Branded Beast, you need to control a Bystial monster. So Branded Regained sort of helps you keep one on board so your beast is constantly live. That's the idea. Where were we? Here, Super Polymerization. Busted card. Super Poly just got a ton better with the introduction of Garura. My biggest pet peeve with this card is that in certain matchups it was useless. You couldn't use it against Adamancipator, you couldn't use it against Flu, you couldn't use it against Exosister. Now you can. So my ultimate pet peeve with Super Polymerization is gone. This card is amazing, for sure. I will be abusing this card moving forward. Cult by the Grave to protect your Branded Fusion. Crossout Designator, protect your Branded Fusion as much as you possibly can. Again, it's not mandatory that this card resolves anymore, but it's definitely very advantageous. Branded Opening. 2 main effects, of course. You can discard a card to special summon a DESPIA monster from your deck or to add it to your hand, that being your Aliber in 99% of cases. That's not really as useful an effect in this version of the deck as its secondary effect, which basically if a fusion monster you control will be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. I very rarely use its ignition effect, the summon a card from a deck, because the deck so easily generates its own advantage now that it's not really necessary a lot of the time. It is still definitely very useful, but I just don't like the fact you have to discard for it. So most of the time I'm basically just sending it to the graveyard for its second effect to protect my fusion monsters. We've got Branded in red, a quick play fusion spell. You will target a Despia or Fallen of Albaz in your graveyard, add it to your hand, and then if you want to, you can conduct a fusion summon of a level 8 or higher monster by banishing monsters from your hand or field. So that is really awesome. Brings out a bunch of different fusion monsters, and especially your Guardian Chimera, which will basically on summon pop. You need to use 3 monsters for this. We'll talk about exactly what it does later, but Branded in red is amazing for summoning things like the Guardian Chimera, or in a pinch you can use it for your regular branded plays. It's just a versatile card. I wouldn't play more than one of it. I don't find myself using it a lot in this deck, but at the same time it is definitely a very useful card to have access to. Infinite Impermanence, generic hand trap, 3 of, absolutely. Helps you crush tier. Branded Retribution is a card, this is not new, but many decks did not play it until recently. If a spell, a trap, or monster effect is activated that includes an effect that special summons a monster, you can either return to your extra deck a face-up fusion monster, or 2 fusion monsters in your graveyard that specifically mention the Fallen of Albaz to negate the activation and destroy the card. It also has another effect that allows you to banish it to recycle back one of your branded spells and traps from the grave. So this card's incredible. You'll be setting this card to your field at the end of your first turn, assuming you resolve your Branded Fusion combo through the effect of Albion. So basically you'll always have access to this card, and even being able to send it to the graveyard off of the likes of Albion the Shrouded Dragon or your Saronir, sometimes even just for its recycling effect, is definitely worth playing at least 1 copy of Retribution, for sure. This card's incredible. Branded Beast. Once per turn, if you control a Bystial monster, you can tribute a dragon to target a card your opponent controls and destroy it. You'll be activating this card straight from your deck off of Lubellion, so you'll always have access to it. During the end phase of a turn, target a branded continuous spell or trap card in your graveyard, place it face up onto your field. So being able to recycle your branded lost and regained. Beast is really, really good. I'm surprised that they made this card an R. They could definitely have gotten away with making this at least an SR, if not a UR. This card's really good. Well, probably an SR. I wouldn't have made it a UR, but yeah. Branded Beast is awesome. One of your primary forms of interruption if your board resolves the way you want it to. Getting into our extra deck, Garura, Wings of Resonant Life. This card is here as the brand new best Super Poly target. You need to fuse any 2 monsters with the same type and attribute but different names. That fusion requirement makes Super Polymerization infinitely more useful. You can now use Super Poly against Flu. You can now use it against Adamancipators. You can now use it against Exosisters, all of which were decks that against which Super Poly was useless, and it was just a brick. So Garura now actually makes Super Polymerization way more valuable. And if this card is ever dealt with, if it gets sent to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. So its actual effect and being on the board isn't really all that important, but if they do get rid of it, you get to draw an extra card. So it basically replaces the discard cost, which is neat. Dragostapelia, one of your primary fusion monsters, a fusion of any fusion monster and a dark monster, another possible super poly target, but you can also just summon it normally. Basically, once per turn, target a monster your opponent controls and place a predator counter onto it. If its level was originally 2 or higher, it becomes a level 1. Now, so long as this guy is face up and your opponent, so long as this guy is face up, all of your opponent's monsters that have predator counters have their effects negated. Have their activated effects negated. So it's an interesting little negate for sure. It also modulates the level, which is very important in a lot of cases. Like against synchro or exceed based strategies, Dragostapelia can interrupt those even more. So yeah, definitely worth playing. We got Titaniclad, which is basically just a big immune beater. It gains attack points equal to the combined levels of its fusion materials, and for the rest of the turn after it summons, it's unaffected by extra deck monsters essentially. So it's basically a big beater. Boosts itself up to 3,700 attack points, and is just immune to effects for 1 turn. Sometimes you just need a big old beat stick to beat through a large monster, or maybe you have an opponent who has a bunch of extra deck negation on board, and you just need a monster to fight through it in the battle phase so you can combo off immune phase 2. Titaniclad definitely has its uses. During the end phase of the turn on which it's sent to the graveyard, you can special summon or add to your hand a Dogmatica or a Fallen of Albaz. Not a particularly useful effect, but it can come up here and there. So yeah. Double copies of Albion the Branded Dragon. This card's effect is twofold in this deck. Number 1, when fusion summoned, you can fusion summon again using this effect by banishing from your hand, field, and graveyard monsters listed on a level 8 or lower fusion monster. So pretty damn useful. His requirements being a Fallen of Albaz and a light monster means you can summon this guy off of your Branded Fusion by sending your Fallen of Albaz and your Bystial Lubellion from your deck to the graveyard. If Bystial Lubellion's already in your graveyard, you can instead send Cartesia, which of course can recycle itself at the end of the turn. So there's quite a lot of valuable targets for Albion now, whereas beforehand there wasn't. So definitely, yeah. It also has an effect where during the end of the turn in which it's sent to the graveyard, you can add to your hand or set to your field a branded spell or trap card directly from the deck. Now, that usually means you're going to be setting your branded Retribution, which is awesome, gives you an extra counter trap negate. You can, of course, set something else like Branded in red. If you send it to the grave during your opponent's turn, you can search yourself a Branded Fusion for follow-up. There's a whole bunch of things you can do. Despian Quiritis. This is basically here primarily as a super poly target or like an emergency Cartesia target. Once per turn, you can basically change the attack points of all monsters on the field to 0 that aren't level 8 or higher fusion monsters, which is useful as a defensive tool sometimes. It's primarily here because its materials are Despia plus any light or dark monster, which just gives it a bit of versatility when it comes to its summoning. You can summon it off of Cartesia very easily, Super Poly very easily. There's a few things you can do to bring it out. Its effect on field is okay, and against huge like Bystial boards, for example, it can be useful in buying you an extra turn. It does have the 2500 defense, which ties off of our Bystial monsters. 2500 is sort of like where you want to be right now in terms of stat lines because of the Bystial cards. You don't really want to be playing anything less than 2500 because these guys are so easy to summon. So yeah, also if it does get sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect or by battle, you get the special summon the Fallen of Albaz or Despia straight from the deck, which is neat, especially with the Fallen of Albaz being able to fusion summon on some of your opponent's cards. Yeah. Despian Quiritis is neat. If you don't have it, I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to craft it. If you have, like, for example, Masquerade the Blazing Dragon accomplishes most of the same goals. I just don't like having a single Masquerade. Because, I don't know, 600 per activation just isn't a lot. But Quiritis also has another little bit of versatility with it, alongside the Dusk Dragon, which we'll talk about in a moment. Getting into our branded cards again, we have Mirror Jade, which is one of the big bad bosses of the deck. Quick play effect, you can banish any card in the field without targeting. Branded is awesome. During the end phase of the turn in which this card gets sent to your graveyard by your opponent, you get to nuke your opponent's board. Just destroy everything. Lubellion. Fusion of a Dark Monster and the Fallen of Albaz. On summon, discard a card to fusion summon again by shuffling cards from your deck, from your field, graveyard, and banish pile back into the deck to fusion summon again. So typically you'll go Albion, fusion summon into Lubellion, fusion summon into Mirror Jade, because this guy needs the Fallen of Albaz and a fusion Synchro Exceed or Link monster. So that's where your Lubellion normally comes in, because you want to keep Albion on the field in this version of the deck so you can tribute Albion off of your Bystial Lubellion. Albulanatus can be contact fusioned by using Fallen of Albaz and any number of dragon monsters anywhere on the field. It can attack monsters per turn up to the number of monsters used for its fusion summon. Once per turn during the end phase, you get to add a polymerization or fusion normal spell card from your deck to your hand if this card's in your graveyard. This doesn't come up a lot. It's kind of nice in the mirror match, it's kind of nice in dragon based matchups, but it's definitely not a card you're going to be using a lot. Dragon Link has seen a bit of a recursion, which I sort of expected to see the opposite of, but Dragon Link is actually making a comeback, which means Albulanatus may become even more useful. We've got the Dusk Dragon. Dusk Dragon, on summon, you will send a level 6 or higher light or dark monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard, and if a monster is special summoned by your opponent's monster effect, you can banish this card from your field or graveyard to special summon a Dogmatica monster from your deck or a Despia monster from your extra deck. Normally that's going to be your Perskenion. It can also be your Quiritus. That's why we play Quiritus over Masquerade. But yeah, Dust Dragon, pretty neat. You fusion summon this using Cartesia and any light or dark monster. Rindbrum, Fallen of Albaz and any Tri-Beast. Whenever your opponent summons an extra deck monster, Fusion, Synchro Exceed, or Link monster effect is activated. You can negate the effect and then return a monster on the field to the hand. So pretty much a negate and bounce, which is pretty damn good. Its graveyard effect is also awesome. During your opponent's turn while this is in your graveyard, you can target a Fallen of Albaz in your grave, special summon either this or the Fallen of Albaz, and banish the other. So it can either recur itself, or it can bring back a Fallen of Albaz for a quick play fusion summon. So Rindbrum is definitely very nice, for sure. Predaplan, Trofovertum. You need 3 dark monsters on the field to summon it, purely a super poly target, 3k beater, take away 3 of your opponent's cards to summon it out, pretty awesome. Guardian Chimera, a fusion of 3 monsters with different names. At least one of them has to be in your hand, and at least one of them has to be on your field. On summon, you will destroy cards your opponent controls up to the number of monsters that were used as material from the field, and you can draw cards equal to the number of monsters that were used as material from the hand. So basically, if 2 were on the field and 1 was in the hand, pop 2, draw 1. If 1 was on the field and 2 were in the hand, pop 1, draw 2. That's really the only 2 situations. And that's basically it. Perskenion here, a decent super poly target. It needs a Despia monster and a light and a dark, which means that you can erase even more of your opponent's monsters off of a super poly for it. But it's primarily here to be summoned out of the Dusk Dragon's effect. During the main phase, you can quick play target a Fusion, Synchro Exceed, or Link monster in your opponent's graveyard, either banish it or special summon it to your field. Very versatile effect, and it also has like a Flame Wingman effect. If it destroys something by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack or defense, whichever is higher. So a bit of a Flame Wingman effect in there, but primarily here to steal your opponent's powerful extra deck monsters from the graveyard. And that's the deck. I've been talking about this a lot. There's a lot to talk about with it, so if you stuck around to the end of this, fair enough, you must actually really want to learn to play this deck, and I appreciate that. If you have stuck around this long, like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.